What is going on? It is 21st Century Lens back with the book of the week, and this week we are going to do a spoiler-free breakdown of Piranesi. I am so excited to sit here and talk to you about Piranesi because of how mind-bending of an experience it was, all within the span of 250 or so pages. What Susanna Clarke was able to pull off with this novel, given the shortness of it, is nothing short of incredible. It's epistolary, it's journal entries from one point of view, and within those journal entries, she had to create a world, make you build empathy for main characters, plural, and unfold a mystery, all within those 250 pages through journal entries. And she somehow pulled it off. It was a fantastical world. I feel like when I think about the book, I can go back to the labyrinth and be there because of how well structured the world building was, slowly unfolding pieces of the mystery throughout the pages. Piranesi follows a man who is trapped in a labyrinth. On the upper floor of the labyrinth, there are clouds. On the bottom floor of the labyrinth, there are ocean waves crashing against the walls. And on the middle floor, in which Piranesi sleeps, there are hallways filled with thousands upon thousands of statues. And this is the world that you're dropped into with no context. I believe the journal entry to start the book says something along the lines of, "This is the year the albatross came to the southwestern halls," boom, and then it starts with the journal entry. And you're like, what? The year the albatross came to the southwestern halls? What the heck does that mean? And you won't know what it means for a few pages. Not a critique of the book, but I will say, I saw many people in reviews dropping this book saying it made no sense to them. In fact, I talked to two people I know in person who said, yeah, I couldn't picture what was going on in my head. It made no sense, so I put it down. Two people. And I only talked to like 5 people about it. And so I saw some reviews that were saying the same thing. So what I would say to those people and to anyone watching this video is make it past 30 pages or so because it starts to make sense. It really does, and it gets explained why the journal entries say this is the year the albatross came to the southwestern halls and why he uses that identifier. And then also, like, as you get further into it, more pieces of the mystery start to get unfolded and it really starts to come together and you become invested in it. Now, on that note of a mystery being unfolded, this isn't a critique of the novel. I actually like this element of it, but it does not have a lot of conflict. It's likened to a cozy fantasy, I want to say, for parts of it, and that's actually, I believe, the purpose of the labyrinth. But without spoiling anything, I will say it's relatively cozy. The conflict does emerge, and it gets you invested in the character, but it's not. How do I word this without spoiling anything? There is conflict, but it's not overwhelming. More important to this story is the plot and the world building and trying to figure out what's going on and why are there statues and why is there ocean waves in the labyrinth down below and ocean waves, and how does he have access to this labyrinth? Is there even a labyrinth? Is he stuck in his mind? Things like that. In fact, I enjoyed it so much that I wrote a Substack post titled Piranesi, or Plato's theory on form and ideals. It would be impossible to talk about my Substack article without spoilers, but if you are interested in a spoiler review of Piranesi, check out my Substack article linked in the description below, where I compare this to Platonic thinking, and I do think there were clear parallels to Plato's theories on ideals and forms. A little bit about the main character. He's naive, he's scientifically minded, and because of that, based on his encounter with one of the other main characters in the book, called The Other, I thought for the first 30 pages, okay, this is a pretty on-the-nose metaphor for science and reason versus religious ideology. He would come speaking to The Other about, look at my journal entries and all these things I discovered about the labyrinth and how XYZ happens based on, other correlating factors. And he was very clearly a scientifically minded individual, and the other person seemed to be a little bit more ideological. And so I thought the whole book was some on-the-nose metaphor of science versus religion, and that these statues represented I don't know, knowledge or ideals in the world, and they were the perfect representation of them. And the house itself represented the planet Earth, or I don't know. I thought it was a little bit more on the nose than what it would ultimately become. It is a mystery novel, and so I'll stop there for sake of not spoiling anything, but it's more than an on-the-nose metaphor. I can say that. And if you give this book enough time, you will absolutely enjoy, I believe, the outcome. I think the payoff for sticking with this book was incredible. And like I said, what she was able to pull off, Susanna Clarke, the author, in the span of 250 so pages, is nothing short of incredible. She had a trifold undertaking that she had to accomplish. World building, which she managed spectacularly. I could imagine the labyrinth and put myself there right now, even a week removed from reading it. Build character empathy through journal entries. And third, unravel a mystery slowly throughout the book. And she manages all three, gets you invested, and the payoff, like I said, is so good. One important note about this book, I will say, is there is conflict, but it's not overwhelming. In fact, for the first half of the book, I would classify this almost as cozy fantasy. It's not, because you're trying to figure out what's going on and you don't know if the main character's safe. And so for that reason, it's not cozy, but you feel like it's a bit cozy. And I actually think that's part of the appeal of the labyrinth. And because that's actually part of it, it just adds to the genius of this novel, where this main character is kind of lured into the comfort of the labyrinth. And that's all I'll say on that front. But for some people, the lack of conflict early on in the book, kind of like lack of what the heck is going on, or a lack of plot structure, might be a turnoff. So for that reason, I don't personally dock it a point, because if you stick with it, it makes sense. But some people, if you're looking for like an action-packed fantasy like Brandon Sanderson, this is not the book for you. But if you are looking for an entry-level fantasy to give to someone where it's standalone, it's 250 pages, there's world building, it's ethereal, and there's payoff, all within the span of 2 days of reading, this is a perfect fantasy entry-level fantasy novel. And I hesitate to say entry level because it's the reading and the prose and the writing is not entry level. It's brilliant. You have to use your imagination a lot. It's actually quite difficult from an imaginative perspective. You'll have to think about it. You'll have to think about your perspective, what you would have done, or what do these things represent. So from like an imaginative, philosophical perspective, it's rather difficult. But for an entry level, you're almost guaranteed to finish it if you can make it past the first 30 pages. I highly recommend this book. Overall, this book was freaking awesome. I give it 5 stars. It's my first 5-star of the year. Look, I'm easily entertained. I give relatively high ratings. I'll be completely honest about that. But this book was life-changing. I would go on walks after putting it down just to think about the concepts that she was introducing. Like I said, I wrote a freaking article on its comparison to Platonic thinking. So for that reason, I have to give it 5 stars. I have to say it's going to be a book that I recommend to someone, especially if they're newer to fantasy and kind of want to read a fiction. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this week's spoiler-free breakdown of Piranesi. Not every week's going to be spoiler-free, but because of the nature of this book and it being relatively new, I thought spoiler-free was the way to go. Thank you so much for being here. Like I said, I hope you have a cup of tea in your hand or something like that. I hope you hit that subscribe button to join me week after week. Next week, I'm going to be reading Fellowship of the Ring. I'm actually about halfway through as this video is being recorded. I have a lot of thoughts on Lord of the Rings. This is my first time reading through it. I've never read them and I've never seen the movies, so it's kind of just a first-hand account of Tolkien. So if you're interested in my reactions and my thoughts on Fellowship of the Ring, stay tuned, hit subscribe. Thank you so much for being here. Talk to you next week.